So yes, again another Noctua review on a Noctua fan. This is the NF-F12 PWM. Now this is probably going to be the longest fan review of them all. Well, if it's not, it's definitely got the most content in, and that is because this isn't like the P12 PWM or the B9 PWM, where they've taken one of their old products and turned it into a PWM product. It's all new, there's nothing. Well, obviously they've taken good bits on their old products and put them into this, but this isn't any sort of replication of an old fan. Brand new fan by Noctua, so that's the NF-F12 PWM. Stay tuned for the video review now, and then there will be links at the end to all the other reviews that I've done on the Noctua fan series, and then there will be the list of the other ones that I haven't done but will be doing soon, so stay tuned for all of that. And we'll get started. So we've got the front of the box here. Now this box is a little different from all the other ones that I've done so far. That is not to say it's an old box design, because this is a brand new fan, so it can't really be an old design. You've got a description of the fan itself, some specifications of the fan, and then if you pull here you have all the information that they want to tell you, and another page on this brand new fan, because they want to tell you what it comes with and why they've brought it out. For example, I can tell you right now that this is not an NF-P12 competitor. It is to bring a fan onto the market that does what the P12 doesn't. For example, this is a high static pressure fan, whereas the P12 isn't exactly a high static pressure fan. But we'll get to that in a second, and it's time to unbox this fan now. So if I take off all the packaging of the fan, and I'll try and get this out and put that to one side, and put that to one side as well. Here you've got an installation, cleaning, connection and warranty sort of manual, so it gives you all of that information, as well as a little letter saying, you know, thank you for buying this product, it's appreciated, blah blah blah, which I think is a nice little touch. And here you've got the fan itself. I'll take these out. So you've got some anti-vibration mounts instead of using screws that come with the fan. We'll put them to one side. You also have a Y cable for connecting two of these fans, say two F12s to one header on your motherboard. You also have a 30cm extension and a low noise power adapter, which I will talk about further into the video, and some screws, as well as the fan itself. Okay, so here we've got the fan, and I'm going to talk about the important features to do with this fan in a second, but I really want to talk about why they brought it onto the market. Now, they brought this fan onto the market because, yes, there's the P12, and that's a perfectly good fan. It's an amazing fan, but what it lacks in compared to this fan is static pressure. Now, why do you need static pressure? Well, some people don't, some people do. If you have a heatsink or a radiator or anything like that with a high fin per inch, you will want a higher static pressure fan. Just like if you have a heatsink or a radiator with a lower fin per inch, you will want one with a lower static pressure. And that's just the way it is. They work better like that. Now this has a higher static pressure than the P12 by a considerable amount. Now that means that Noctua now have a product on the market that will work well with high fin per inch heatsinks. So if you have a high fin per inch heatsinks, Noctua now have a product that will work well for you, instead of having a good fan that might work adequately. So it's time to get on to what I would say is the big features to do with creating this high static pressure with this fan, and then we'll get on to what that brings along with it and how they counteract certain problems to do with that. Okay, so here's the front of the fan, and here's probably the biggest, most important feature to do with improving the static pressure of the fan. Now, you might think, well, it's just blades. This, compared to say the P12, has bigger, chunkier, less aerodynamic blades than say the P12, because the P12 has a 9-blade design, more curved, more, well, aerodynamic. Now, what this means that this does is it pretty much takes the air and it throws it through and it says, you know, you're going through, but it doesn't really think about noise. This produces more noise than the P12, but it pushes more air through in a certain way. Now, that pretty much it makes it clear that one of the disadvantages to having a certain fan with high static pressure is that they're louder. But like I said, I'll get onto the features which counteract that. Now, a second feature to do with improving static pressure is what they call the focused flow frame. Now, what this does is it directs the air that's being pushed through in a certain direction, instead of it going out in all directions like a lot of, say, stock or cheap rubbish fans do. This blows it out in a sort of tunnel way. Now, this means that in this area there is a higher static pressure because there's more air being pushed through in that direction. So that increases the static pressure in this area, but it will also, like I said, increase noise. Now, another thing which might, to some extent, affect the static pressure is the bearings on this fan. It's got SSO2 bearings. Now, these won't suddenly rapidly increase the static pressure from 1 to 2. What it does is it keeps the static pressure at the high rate that it is for a longer period of the fan's life. So this will stay at a high static pressure throughout its life, compared to, say, if it was using an SSO bearing, because it is a high performance bearing. So let's get on to what makes this fan quieter while keeping it, you know, higher static pressure than, say, if it didn't have these features. Now, you might think, well, that's only 3 features that improve static pressure. Well, there's a lot more features that try and tone down the noise and make this fan quieter overall, because it is hard to create a high static pressure fan that is also quiet at the same time, and there's a lot of things that have to be involved to make it quieter. The first thing is obviously these anti-vibration mounts. Now, yes, I would recommend using these, but Noctua thought that wasn't good enough, and they have increased their rubber sort of separation between the case and the fan itself by using these anti-vibration pads as well, so that if you were to use both of them, there would be even more rubber between the case and the fan itself. You also have a stepped inlet design, which is these sort of lines here, these ridges. Now, what this does is it apparently, I'm saying apparently because I can't say that this is scientifically proven or whatever, but I'm just trusting Noctua on this. These direct the air so that as they're going through the fan, they're not creating sort of turbulence and air spinning around here, which will create more noise. So that's meant to make it quieter as it enters the fan. On the back, when we're talking about the air coming out of the fan, you have these vortex control notches on the focused flow frame. Now, what these are meant to do is, in this specific area that the air is getting blown, pardon me, you have these vortex control notches which are directing the air and spreading them out in that area. So it's not just being all blown into one specific point in this area, because these frame is to keep it in that area, and these notches are to spread it out in that area, so that overall it's quieter. And then as it's passing through the fan, so in between both of them, they've also added another feature which I can't really pick up on the camera because they're tiny, but they're called inner surface microstructures. Now what these do is they're theoretically, again, I can't prove that it actually does help, but they theoretically produce and create a layer of air between the ends of the blades and the case of the fan itself. Now what this air is meant to be is sort of a buffer, so that as these blades are spinning around, they're not forcing air to hit the side of the case of the fan and create vibrations and noise and even more unnecessary annoyance. So it's meant to create a sort of buffer. So that is all the features that are meant to lower vibrations and keep the fan running quiet. So I'll plug it in now and I'll see how it performs and give my conclusions on this fan now, so stay tuned for that. Okay, so here we've got the fan up and running, and I'll give you the specs because I've given you the features but not the specs. So in terms of RPM, it runs at 1500 without the low noise power adapter. Now I said I'd get back to this. So here we've got the low noise power adapter. On PWM fans, if you haven't seen my videos before, I explain it in every video. On PWM fans, it's an RPM limiter, whereas on 3-pin standard fans, it is a voltage limiter. So you've got the circuits, the 5 and the 7 volt circuits, and if it's uncontrolled, then it's 12 volts. Then it goes to 7 and then 5, depending on which is cut off, the 7 or the 5 volts. Whereas the RPM limiters on PWM, specifically, they just control the RPM of the fan. So it's a lot more difficult in terms of actually building a PWM fan. So in terms of that, it's 1500 without the control, without the low noise power adapter. I'll call it the LNA. It's 1500 RPM without and 1200 with it. In terms of airflow, it runs at 93.4 cubic meters per hour, or 74.3 cubic meters per hour with the LNA. And I forgot to mention the minimum RPM of this fan is 300. Ow. Calm down. And that's the specs on that. And static pressure, which is the big thing that I was talking about, without the low noise adapter, it runs at 2.61. compared to, say, the P12 premium fan, which runs at 1.68. So that's 2.61 compared to 1.68. I haven't worked out the percentage, but that is a pretty big percentage. And in terms of running with the low noise adapter, which this comes with as well, this runs at 1.83 and this will run at 1.21. So static pressure, like I said, is a big feature to do with it with this fan, and it's time to get on to my conclusion of this fan and tell you what I think and whether I think it's actually worth it to get a fan like this. So on to the conclusion of the Noctua NF-F12 PWM fan. I'm not going to tell you buy it or don't buy it, because that doesn't really help at all. So I'm going to tell you, ask yourself the question, what are you going to be using this fan for? Because this fan is sort of, it's made for a certain purpose, and that is high fin density heat sinks or radiators. So if you're going to be using it as a case fan, there's better fans out there to use to fit that purpose. For example, the Noctua NF-F12 pulls through just as much air but is quieter, and that's because it's a lower static pressure. But having it as a case fan, you're not benefiting from any static pressure produced by this fan, because it's not on a heatsink. And then if you're going to be putting it on a heatsink, you've also got to look at the fins per inch. If it's a low fin per inch, you actually want a lower static pressure, lower RPM fan to work with that, because you will benefit from having a low RPM, low static pressure fan on a low fin per inch heatsink, because they work best together. That's the most efficient way. If you're going to be using it on a high fin per inch, you want a high static pressure, high RPM fan, which pushes through a lot of air. And they work best together, and it doesn't really work as well if you're going to mix between them. So this is a high static pressure fan, which Noctua brought on the market because they didn't have something in that range, whereas they do have the P12, which can be in the low static pressure area. So they brought this out to use with high fin per inch heatsinks. So if you're going to be using this with a high fin per inch heatsink, good, do that. But if you're going to be getting a low fin per inch heatsink, I would recommend getting something like the P12 instead, because this is a sort of single purpose fan, really. So yeah, that is all I have to say on the Noctua NF-F12 PWM fan. Don't forget to comment, subscribe, like the video or whatever. Check out the website and everything where you can post. That's where you can post now any suggestions or requests for reviews. So if there's a particular review you want doing, go over and post there. There's also the Facebook page and all of that. Whatever, it's in the link in the description box below. But yeah, I'm Hal Thompson. Don't forget to subscribe, and goodbye.